In 2018, in the Tata Steel Masters, we had really an interesting clash of the titans. Magnus Carlsen, the world's strongest player, faced the best female chess player in the world, Hou Yifan. And this was such a beautiful game, in my opinion, one of the best games that has been played in 2018. The game had everything, really beautiful opening theory, cool middle game strategies, but then afterwards, really an immortal endgame technique. And if you think that Magnus Carlsen won this game very easily, you'd be surprised, because Hou Yifan is really an interesting player. I think in chess history, Hou Yifan is ranked like maybe the second best female chess player of all time. Still, I think Judith Polgar is the one, but Hou Yifan had really incredible chess career, so be prepared, this will be now really interesting game. So here Magnus played with the white pieces and opened with the move c4. Hou Yifan response was e6. We have now the Angkor defense against the English opening. Now we have knight to c3, Ne4 d5, d4. The game transposed now into the queen's gambit decline. After knight to f3, we have c takes d5, the exchange variation, and now an interesting idea, knight to d5, basically inviting here white to go with this move e4. But actually after e4, knight to c3 beat c3, the game would transpose into some ideas of the Tarrasch, which I think lead into too simplified line for both sides. So that's why probably Magnus didn't want to go into drawish sequences. He wanted to spice up the game and played maybe a slightly more passive move, but didn't play the aggressive line which maybe Hou Yifan wanted to play in the first place. So now after move e3, Hou plays, I think, the really interesting choice, c5. You have to break now the center here. We have bishop to d3, c takes d4, e takes d4, and now knight takes c3, b takes c3. And Hou Yifan's idea was to provoke this backward pawn, this weakness on c3. So that's why now with queen to c7, this pawn gets attacked. We have now bishop to d2 by Magnus Carlsen, and now knight to d7. Queen to g4, very interesting choice. This idea is, of course, to slow down a little bit, of course, black's progress, because black wants to develop the bishop and, of course, secure the king by castling. So that's why first knight to f6 has to be played. And now comes the first maybe interesting moment of the game. Magnus goes with queen to g3, basically forcing a trade of queens, which is playable, and it has been played many times. But as I said, I thought, okay, why should anyone trade off queens so early? When you trade off queens, then the game is more and more simplified. So I thought probably you want to maybe get out of these ideas. But actually with queen to g3, queen takes g3, h takes g3, Magnus provoked already some attacks on the h file, and he's already saying, I'm satisfied with this position because I have now two connected pawns in the center of the board, which are restricting, of course, black's ability to play. I have a close king here in the center, the knight will be developed, and I have my chances here, maybe on the a file, maybe also on the b file. So as I said, nothing spectacular, but Magnus Carlsen is already saying here, I'll try to squeeze you here. I try to play really a slow boa constrictor game without any complications, without the queens, of course. So as I said, the risky choice, you now have to really make something out of this endgame. So here in the continuation, we have bishop to d6, knight to f3, we have b6 by Hou Yifan, and now Magnus goes with a4. This is the way to go, playing this so-called minority attack, playing with this pawn against both of these pawns, hoping to provoke some weaknesses. And a weakness, of course, can be a weak pawn or a weak square. So that's why when we maybe trade off the a pawn, maybe for the b pawn, then of course black will, for instance, will be left with an a pawn, so it could be maybe a weak pawn. Then of course white wants to attack this pawn further. So as I said, the minority attack we use in order to provoke structural weaknesses in our opponent's position. So here Hou Yifan plays the normal bishop to b7. Magnus goes with his plan, a5. We have now king to e7. You don't need to calculate here. This is a good move by Hou, because she noticed, of course, this is close really to a full endgame stage. So that's why when you play an endgame, then you want to have your king towards the center, closer to the center. So now king to e7, a brilliant move. So king to e2, Magnus does the same. We have now knight to e4. Good choice to simply cement this knight around this beautiful square. And there are now weaknesses here. The bishop is a little bit stuck to the defense of the pawn on c3. So Hou Yifan continues to play on the idea that she created in the first place, playing simply on this backward pawn weakness on c3. Good choice, of course. We have now bishop to e1. Magnus has now to retreat with the bishop because Magnus is trying to stay with the bishop here. But notice there is a new problem with this move bishop to e1. When Magnus played now the move bishop to e1, he lost his rook connection. And the rook connection is also a very important stage in the game because the rooks are best functioning when they are connected. So now with the move bishop to e1, Magnus lost a little bit of connection. Hou Yifan connects with the normal h6, preventing maybe some knight to g5 ideas later. Here we have c4 by Magnus Carlsen, and now comes maybe the first move that I didn't like by Hou. She played knight to f6, and this was, in my opinion, not so good. Maybe f5. You have this powerful knight in the center of the board, which is controlling the bishop on e1. And now look at this, the bishop on b4 is also controlling the, the bishop on d6 is controlling the potential b4 square for the bishop. So the bishop on e1 would be still a little bit paralyzed. And I'm not sure if Magnus would ever give up maybe this bishop for this knight here. I'm not sure if Magnus would ever really trade off this kind of an idea. So giving up this light square bishop for a knight still would be risky because this knight is this bishop is coming into the game still. Black is continuing the game with the bishop here, so maybe in my opinion f5 would be slightly better here for blacks. But okay, after move c4, Hou Yifan played knight to f6, simply retreating with the knight, hoping now to get the bishop on e4 and again trade off this bishop for this powerful bishop here on d3. So here Magnus goes with bishop to c3, bishop to e4, rook from h to b1. Magnus continues with this beautiful minority attack. Look how Magnus regrouped. That's what I didn't like about this idea by Hou. She basically invited this bishop to c3 in the beginning with the move knight to e4. The knight took this square c3 for the bishop. Now Magnus had some chances to regroup it again to activate more pieces. So now Magnus is rolling again. Okay, this is far away from losing, of course, for black, but I think you can feel the pressure now. This is now the position that Magnus loves to play. This is now the position that he wanted to get all of the pieces activated, the king in the center, and now he plays on a simple weakness. That's his style many times. So bishop to d3 by Hou Yifan. We have king to d3, knight to d7, knight to d2, rook to d8, and now knight to e4. Magnus rerouted now the knight on a better square. Good stuff here by Magnus. Now bishop to c7, and now bishop to b4, hitting the king. The king has to step back, and now f4. And here you see nothing spectacular in this position. We cannot say black is losing, as I said, but it feels so uncomfortable. I think to play this kind of an end game against Magnus Carlsen. Let's flip the board like I really love to do. How would you feel, for instance, in this position? As I said, it's not losing, it's not something that white can win very easily, but it's really unpleasant, especially against Magnus Carlsen, who finds now in the next couple of moves really the best suggested engine moves. He finds really the best solutions now for white. Really incredible endgame technique so far by Magnus Carlsen. So rook from a to c8 by Hou Yifan. We have 8x b6, we have 8x b6, and now rook to a7. Magnus gets now the rook on this very active square. We have now knight to b8, controlling the square c6. So we're trying now to play the fork against the bishop and the rook. And now comes the stunner of the game. Now comes an immortal tactical shot. I think really one of the best moves from 2018 for sure. Incredible stunner that Magnus Carlsen pulled off here. Rook takes c7, sacrificing the rook for the exchange in such a stage of the game because okay, maybe you see the next couple of moves, maybe you feel there's something, but still you have to have such a great calculation skill here because you have to now understand what's going on. You have to create pass pawns here. Now Magnus with the move rook to c7 found a stunning sequence, but still it's unclear how to make progress because after rook to c7 that you have to play, now Magnus goes with knight to d6. The problem is now you cannot play king to f8, you cannot get in front of the bishop because you get this kind of an idea. Knight to b5, you bring now maybe the rook in between, but now with knight to a7 we're still threatening knight to c6, and maybe black can play something like rook to d7. Now we play knight to c8, also continue the pressure against the rook on e7, but now after knight to c6 we pick up the rook, you pick up also maybe here the piece, and after bishop to e7, king to e7, we can pick up now this pawn on b6, and this is now +1 pawn position for white. Okay, maybe you can play this, but in my opinion, Magnus Carlsen would win this particular position against Hou Yifan. Magnus is, of course, the best player, the best endgame player of all time, so I think he could squeeze this win for sure. So as I said, this King to F8 move is not working in this position, so you have to find a different idea. So that's why after move knight to d6 that Magnus played, now we have king to d7 by Hou Yifan, we have knight to f7. That was Magnus Carlsen's idea. He wants to get this pawn, and after this move, knight to e5, the king has to step back, and now Magnus attacks further the rook. The rook has to step back now to b7, and now Magnus has this sequence c5. So this whole sequence by Magnus Carlsen was really forced. No other moves could have been played by Hou Yifan. Now after move c5, you cannot pick up, of course, the pawn because your rook is hanging on b7. Really wild stuff. So now after move knight to c6 that Hou Yifan played, Magnus played now rook to b6 immediately. Although maybe a slightly better move, I would say, is maybe to play knight to c4, maybe keeping more pieces on the board, because after rook to b6, it's obviously going to force it further trades of pieces, which is not good for white. White should, I think, complicate things further. Knight to c4 is slightly better, but Magnus Carlsen's continuation still good, so he's not losing because he played rook to b6. But after knight to c4, black has maybe this resource b5, but now we play knight to b6, hitting the rook, and now we can pick up the pawn on b5 and keep, maybe still, look at this, our bishop on the board, our knight on the board, our rook on the board, and still we have this interesting pawn structure here. So still playable position, of course, for white. As I said, maybe this was also an interesting choice, but Magnus played rook to b6. After rook takes b6, c takes b6, Magnus searched for a more direct way with only creating this pass around the b files. The problem for Hou Yifan is also that she cannot play knight takes e5. This was something also that bothered black here in the continuation, and I'm really sure that from this moment when Magnus Carlsen played rook to c7 here, that he saw this tactical sequence in this move. So let's go again, like knight to d6, knight to f7, knight to e5, king has to step back, now bishop to d6. I'm really sure that Magnus Carlsen saw all of this. I'm really sure, really wild stuff how Magnus is playing now the game. So after bishop to d6, as we said, c5, knight to c6, rook to b6, and now the knight has to step back. So as I said, knight to e5 is never an opportunity because you get this one, f takes e5, and the pawn is rolling. You cannot play king to d7. Look at this, b7 b8 is going to happen. The bishop is covering the square b8, so it's game over here for black. So you cannot trade off the knights. That was Hou Yifan's problem. So here after c takes b6, knight to d8, we have bishop to c7, attacking now the knight, rook to a8, and now Magnus gets closer with the king. Magnus includes now the king in a beautiful way into the game. So knight to b7, king to b5, rook to a2, and now g4, connecting now the pawn to the knight on e5. The knight is really beautiful here in the center of the board. Here we had king to e7 by Hou Yifan. If you play king to g2, rook takes g2 here, pardon me, then this is the problem, I think. King to a6, we play knight to f8, then we play king to a7. You can maybe try to get your rook back into the game, but now when the king is on b8, this is very dangerous, I think, for black. We'll just push the pawn further. There are always some tactics with knight to c6. Maybe if you get your king towards the queen side too much, maybe one of these pawns could be also taken. So it's, as I said, not so easy here also in this position for black to defend this kind of an endgame. So as I said, really wild stuff how Magnus can play this kind of position without the rook. So he's down the exchange, but still he has so many attacking opportunities. So after move g4, Hou Yifan played king to e7 instead of rook takes g2. Magnus continued with g3, simply move the pawn further. We have knight to d6, bishop to d6 now by Magnus, king to d6, and now knight to c4, king to d7. We have king to c5. Magnus gets now the king on a better square, rook to c2, and now another really interesting choice by Magnus Carlsen, because that's the beauty I think about this game, because Magnus Carlsen through the whole game played the only winning move that he can. I'm not saying, as I said, this is winning, but if he plays something else, he will not win it for sure. So he will not win the game. So he found now another brilliant move. Maybe you can pause the video and try to search for an idea here for white in this endgame, maybe just for fun, try to see now the best continuation. Again, it's not winning, I'm just saying, but here with this move, Magnus Carlsen kept the pressure, which is, I think, very important in endgames, that you keep your opponent occupied, that you keep your opponent busy, and Magnus Carlsen does it in the best way. He's the best player when it comes to keeping you busy, I think. So after move rook to c2, here the brilliant move by Magnus Carlsen was f5. So he, after e takes f5, g takes f5, created now a new passer. So he has now two pass pawns. He has the knight. And again, I'm pointing out, if Hou Yifan plays now this endgame correctly, this should be probably a draw. But Magnus is Magnus. When you play the endgame, look at this. After g takes f5, rook to f2, we have now, as I said, these two connected passers, and Magnus continues with knight to d6, protects now also the pawn on f5. Now comes maybe the first mistake by Hou Yifan in the game. Rook to g2 was played, and this is not good. Again, this is also not losing immediately. So, but there was a better continuation, h5. And h5, I think, would solve every problem now in black's camp, because you can play something like b7 now. You maybe try to push the pawn, but now the king gets closer. So basically, black is waiting this pawn to be moved, and then of course we can play king to c7, playing this very important defensive resource. So now, of course, maybe king knight to e8 can be played, attacking the king with the fork. We pick up now the pawn. Okay, maybe white can also pick up the pawn, but actually there is this defensive resource. We have now this opportunity for black, rook to f3, king to d5. Now we pick up this one. You can also maybe try this kind of an idea, but now we just push the pawn further. And after rook to f3, the problem is now the king gets closer, but it gives you extra time now to push your pawn here. Knight to f5 can be played, rook takes f5, king to f5. We have now h2, f8, and now after h1, the promotion. This should be probably playable endgame here for black. This should be probably a drawish endgame. So this was just a pervert stock for 15 line that I showed you. So you have to find really this resource h5 in this particular position. Unfortunately for who she played rook to g2, attacked the pawn on g3. But again, this is far away from winning here for white. So still you have to play really the immortal moves. Magnus Carlsen continues in a good way. He plays now the correct move, knight to e4. Connects now the knight to the pawn on g3. We have now rook to b2 by Hou Yifan, and now g4. Rook to b1. We have knight to d2. We have a rook to h1, and after d5 that Magnus Carlsen played, now comes the critical moment of the game. So this is this typical endgame by Magnus Carlsen. So it's always about 0.0, but it's always a position that Magnus is attacking. It's not the position in which black is attacking. Black is defending the position through the whole game. So from a computer evaluations, it's always 0.0. But for a human eye, it's always white is attacking black here. So that's, I think, the problem here. Hou Yifan played simply only defensive moves, and I think it's much easier to be on the attacking side. So now here she played h5, and this was now the crucial mistake of the game, because the only way to survive this attack by white is to play rook to d1, and after something like knight to c4, now we get back to c1, and we are paralyzing the knight. Whenever d6 happens or something, then we get behind this pawn. We're not allowing this pawn to be moved. And now maybe knight to e5 you can play. Now we played something like this, king to c6, after rook to c1. You can play maybe something like king to b7, but again, we are just holding with our rook behind these pawns, behind this knight, and this should be a drawish line. But instead of this move rook to d1, Hou Yifan played h5, and this gives Magnus Carlsen now the opportunity to play d6 now, and it's a different story, because for instance, if you play rook to d1 now, then it's winning, because look at this, we can play now the move b7, and the problem is now you don't have the access to the square b1 because the knight is holding this position. So you cannot play also rook to d2 because we'll simply promotion, we'll have here simple promotion, and you cannot get with your king towards the pawn. That's also the issue here. So really stunning idea. Instead of this move rook to d1, you can maybe try rook to c1. You could try maybe a check. But this is still not working, because now knight to c4 is going to happen. You can maybe pick up this pawn, but look at this. Again, with b7, you have to go with the rook behind. And now the knight is coming into the game with the check. You have to step back, and now we'll promote the queen, because the knight is holding, of course, the b file. If you, of course, trade it off, now you didn't change anything here. Still, there is a promotion on b8. So really wild stuff. So see, after move d5, Hou Yifan played this main mistake in the game, h5 instead of rook to d1. Now, as we said, Magnus simply played d6. Hou Yifan played king to c8 because no other rook moves you saw were working here for black. In the continuation, Magnus played now g takes h5, rook to h5, but now the king came closer to c6. We have here rook to b8, knight to e4, rook to f5, but whatever you do, even if you play rook to h8, something like this, we have always this d7, then we do also play with our knight. We can also maybe use the square f7, then we can promote. So it's still a messed up game here for black. So after move knight to e4, as we said, rook to f5 was played by Hou Yifan, and now after move knight to c5, rook to f8, and knight to d7, for instance, this would be also a losing game. So after move knight to c5, in this position, Hou Yifan resigned. So as we said, whatever you do, there's nothing that can be done. You can play maybe rook to f7 here. It's also not working because we play simply b7 with the preparation to play here knight to d7, attacking the king and also threaten the promotion on b7. You can maybe just give up the rook, but then we have this other passer, so it's still game over here for Hou Yifan. Incredible game, I think, by Magnus Carlsen. He squeezed really the win here somehow. Of course, this win is a little bit also a result of Hou Yifan's mistakes in the endgame stage, but sometimes you have to force the win. Sometimes you have to be aggressive. Sometimes you have to be aggressive like this. Magnus Carlsen is never letting you escape with an easy draw. Even if you make a draw, he'll try the best to win this endgame. So in my opinion, really the best player, the best endgame player of all time. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas here by Magnus Carlsen in the endgame stage. If you want to see more cool Magnus Carlsen games, but also some other great games that we have analyzed, check out some of my commented chess games. Here's the link of our playlist, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.